What if God will bless you right where you are, even if you're in a bad situation? Hey, everybody, this is Pastor Justin Walker with The Whole Truth. We're going through the entire Bible from Genesis all the way to Revelation, and we're not skipping anything. So grab a Bible and turn it open to Genesis 39. Now, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. Now, remember that we've had this kind of parenthetical chapter. We had this interlude chapter of Judah and Tamar, and that was in chapter 38. But before that little interlude that we had, and by the way, that's because God was telling us the story of how Jesus would come, or what line he would come through, how Jesus would come through the line of Judah, how Jesus would come through Tamar, how Jesus would come through this guy named Perez. None of that was a righteous situation. That was a very unrighteous, sinful situation. But God was still going to use that family. That was from Genesis chapter 38. Remember with me from 37, there's this guy named Joseph. So you've got Abraham, and then Isaac, and then Jacob. Jacob's name is changed to Israel. Israel has 12 sons, and one of those sons, his name was Joseph. He was the favored son. And though the line of Jesus, the Messiah, doesn't come through the line of Joseph, Joseph pictures Jesus for us. And so we turn now in Genesis 39, now Joseph. We go back to Joseph. What happened with Joseph? He was sold to the captain of the guard, a high-ranking security official, captain of the police, if you will, chief of police, if you will. That's who the captain of the guard is. His name is Potiphar. He bought Joseph. And look at what's happening in Joseph's life. Look at this. It's in verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. He was in the house of his master the Egyptian, and his master saw the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him an overseer of his house, and all that he had, and he put under his authority. And so it was from that time that he had made him an overseer of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. And there's a little more of that verse, but I'm going to stop there in verse 6 for just a moment and say, did you see what happened? Joseph, we don't see him complain. We don't see him fight back. We don't see him worrying. All we see from Joseph is this: he serves well. The Lord is blessing him, and he serves to the best of his ability. And as he's serving to the best of his ability, the Lord is blessing him, and Potiphar notices it. And Potiphar continues to give him responsibilities and privileges in his house, to the point by the time we get to the end of it, Potiphar doesn't even know what he has except for the bread that's on his plate in front of him. He's not counting what's in his storehouses because he's not worried that Joseph's going to steal it. He's not checking up on his servants because he knows that they're well taken care of. Why? Because he can trust Joseph, because Joseph has done a good job. Now, may I make this point to you, that Joseph, this didn't happen overnight for Joseph. This was not just an overnight thing. If I'm doing my math correctly, Joseph was taken into captivity. He was taken as a slave or sold as a slave when he was just 17 years old. Later, we'll read that he's 30 years old when he becomes the servant of Pharaoh, when he becomes second in command to Pharaoh. And there's a 2-year span that he's in prison, which we'll get to in this chapter, how he lands himself in prison, or how he finds himself in prison. And so if I take 30 years and take off the 2 years that he's in prison, that takes him down to 28 years old. 17 when he sold, 28 years old when he goes into prison. That means that Joseph, what we just read of Joseph, was an 11-year time span. For 11 years, he served as a servant and as a slave. Now, we could have seen him looking for his escape. We could have seen him looking to get out of his situation. We could have seen him fighting against and rebelling against Potiphar, the Egyptian, who had bought him. But none of those things were true of Joseph. What Joseph did was serve well, even though he was put into the position of a servant. And I'm reminded of Christ, who left heaven's glory and came to earth's gloom. He who knew no sin became sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. You see, Jesus came to this earth and he came as a servant. The Son of Man came to serve, not to be served. And I always find it interesting when we consider that Jesus, think of the things that Jesus did. We never see him go to the rabbis. We never see him go to school, if you will, to the rabbi school. And yet everybody called him teacher. We see that Jesus, he never bought a slave. He owned no slaves. And yet everyone called him master. You see, Jesus came and humbly served, and the Lord blessed him. And his, if you will, his popularity and his stature and his fame grew, but never because Jesus was aiming for fame. He was just doing what God had called him to do. And I'm telling you the same thing. I don't know what your situation is, but whatever it is, you can serve the Lord faithfully. And if you'll faithfully serve the Lord will bless you right where you are. Sometimes I think we want God to bless us out of a bad situation. We see a bad situation, we say, Lord, bless me, Lord, take care of me, Lord, deliver me even. But sometimes the Lord's plan isn't to deliver you, but to bless you right where you are. Now, look at this. Well, the story, the plot thickens, if you will, at last half of verse 6. Now, Joseph was handsome in form and in appearance. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph. And she said, lie with me. And he refused. And he said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in his house. And he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I. Nor has he kept anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And so it was as Joseph spoke, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not heed to her, to lie with her, to be with her. And it happened about this time that when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. And so it was when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, that he called to the men of her house, that she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, see, he has brought to us a Hebrew to mock us, and he came in to lie with me. And I cried out with a loud voice. And it happened when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside. And so she kept his garment with her until his master came home. And then she spoke to him with the words like these, saying, the Hebrew servant who you brought to us came in to me to mock me. And so it happened as I lifted up my voice and I cried out, that he left his garment and he fled outside. And so it was when his master heard these words, which his wife spoke to him, saying, your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. And then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in the prison. Oh my goodness. So here we are, 11 years of service. And somewhere in the middle of that 11 years, Potiphar's wife starts flirting with Joseph. And more than just flirting. She's casting a longing eye on him. Then she's coming to him and she's making propositions to him. Okay? She's trying to get him to sleep with her. And the Bible said day by day. Gets to the point, this is every single day. She's trying to corner him. She's trying to get in the room alone with him. She's trying to have an affair with Joseph, and Joseph won't do it. And so finally, after 11 years of service, one day there's nobody else in the house. Joseph is in the house taking care of whatever he's supposed to be taking care of in that day. By this point, Potiphar had left everything with him. There was nothing withheld from Joseph except his wife, except Potiphar's wife. That's the only thing in the house that Joseph didn't have access to. And his wife continues to proposition Joseph day by day by day. And you can kind of see the intensity building. And finally, one day she corners him. And it says that she grabbed his garment. She snagged his garment. In other words, she's ripped his garment off of him and he's pulled away. And she's holding the garment. And he says, no, I'm not going to do this. And he flees. He runs off. He does not want to be put in this temptation. And she goes and claims that he tried to rape her. She claims that he tried to lie with her, and she cried out with a loud voice, tells all the men of the house. And then when her husband Potiphar comes home, she tells Potiphar the same story. Potiphar gets so mad, he throws Joseph down into the prison. Now we know, God's word tells us Joseph was acting righteously. And by the way, I'm going to remind you again that Jesus, who knew no sin, that he became sin for us. He never sinned. Joseph here, we see Joseph did not sin. Jesus, we read in Hebrews chapter 4, we read that Jesus is our great and high priest, and we don't worship a great and high priest or have a great and high priest who's not been touched with our infirmities, that Jesus has been tempted in every way that we have been tempted, and yet without sin. And we see here Joseph, he acted righteously. He's acting uprightly, and yet he's the one who gets thrown into prison. Jesus, who is righteousness, embodied in this person of Jesus, he is the Son of God who came to this earth and never sinned. He lived a sinless life, and yet he's the one who hung on a tree. Well, that's the same thing we're seeing out of Joseph. Joseph is righteous, and he's the one being put into prison because of the claim that Potiphar's wife made against him. But look at this. We see it again. Let's circle back around and see it again in verse 19. So it was when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, Your servant did to me after this manner. His anger was aroused, and Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, the place of the king's prisoners were confined, and it was that he was there in the prison. Verse 21, But the Lord was with Joseph, and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison, and the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. Do you see that? Even in prison, do we see Joseph fighting? Do we see him trying to escape? Is he trying to get somebody? Did he make a friend of one of the other servants in Potiphar's house and try to get them to bring him a file so he could escape out of the prison? None of the above. Joseph did not try to escape even a little. That's not what we see. Instead, even in prison, what do we see is that the Lord blessed him, and that even in the bad situation, here he is a prisoner. I'm sure Joseph doesn't want to be a prisoner, but even as a prisoner, we see the Lord bless him, and he starts to ascend to the ranks even in the prison. And now all the prisoners are given under Joseph. It gets to the point that the prison guard doesn't even look into what's happening with the prisoners because he knows that he can trust Joseph. Friends, I would tell you to do the same thing today. Remember, no matter what situation you're in, no matter where you work, whatever your family is, no matter where you are in life, serve the Lord with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength. Love the Lord and serve him. Do everything unto him, and he will bless you right where you are. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you tomorrow with Genesis chapter 40.